The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 2026. Daniel Rivera almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. The subject line read, "You need to see this place before they tear it down." No name, no signature. Just an address on the edge of Portland and a grainy photo of an old mansion attached. Daniel had been exploring abandoned buildings for 5 years now, documenting forgotten pieces of history before they disappeared forever. His YouTube channel had grown slowly but steadily, attracting people who loved the mystery of places left behind. But this was different. Something about that photo pulled at him. The mansion sat at the end of a long, overgrown driveway hidden behind massive oak trees that hadn't been trimmed in decades. Daniel stood at the rusted iron gates with his camera crew. Just 2 friends, really. Tommy with the camera and Lisa handling sound. The 3 of them had done this dozens of times, but the size of this place made them pause. "This is insane," Tommy whispered, adjusting his lens. "How does a place like this just sit here for 40 years? Daniel had done his research. The property belonged to a family trust that had been tied up in legal battles since 1986. Something about a tragedy, heirs who couldn't agree, lawyers who kept the whole thing frozen in time. The Historical Society had finally won the right to document everything inside before the property was sold to developers. They'd given Daniel and his team exactly 1 week to film whatever they wanted. The front door groaned as they pushed it open. The smell hit them first, musty, damp, mixed with something else. Time, maybe. That's what old places smelled like. Time sitting still. Inside, it was like walking into a photograph from another century. A grand staircase swept upward, its banister thick with dust. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing older patterns underneath. In the parlor, furniture sat draped in white sheets that had turned gray and torn in places. A chandelier hung crooked from the ceiling, half its crystals missing. "Nobody's been in here?" Lisa asked, her voice echoing. "The lawyers came through once in the 90s, Daniel said, reading from his notes. Otherwise sealed tight. They spent the first hour just walking through, filming everything. Each room told a story of sudden abandonment. Books still sat on shelves. Dishes remained in the kitchen cabinets. Clothes hung in closets, though moths had done their work. It was as if everyone had simply walked out one day and never looked back. Then they found the ballroom. The double doors were stuck, swollen with moisture. Tommy had to throw his shoulder against them twice before they gave way. When they finally opened, all 3 of them stood frozen in the doorway. The room was massive, easily 50 feet long. Tall windows lined one wall. Their heavy curtains rotted through, letting in shafts of dusty sunlight. The ceiling had partially collapsed in one corner, bringing down chunks of plaster and wooden beams. Water damage had left dark stains spreading across the walls like maps of unknown countries. But none of that mattered. In the center of the room, covered in debris and dust, sat a grand piano. "Holy," Tommy breathed, already moving forward with the camera. Daniel approached slowly. Even under all that damage, you could see it had been magnificent once. The wood was black, or had been. Now it was mottled and warped. Part of the ceiling had come down directly on top of it, crushing the music stand. Water had clearly gotten inside. He could see the warping along the edges. "It's huge," Lisa said, running her hand along what was left of the finish. "This thing must weigh 1,000 pounds. Daniel circled it, filming every angle. There was something haunting about it. This beautiful instrument left to rot, probably unplayed for 4 decades. He tried to imagine the last person who'd sat here, the last song played, the last notes that had filled this room with music. "Can you even restore something like this?" Tommy asked. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But we need to document every inch of it." They spent the next 2 hours in that ballroom. Daniel filmed the piano from every possible angle while Lisa recorded ambient sound. The creaks of the old house, the wind whistling through broken windows, the distant sound of birds outside. Tommy found a maker's mark partially visible through the grime. Steinway and Sons, with a date that looked like 1887. "This thing is almost 140 years old," Tommy said. "Odd." Daniel was checking the bench, which had somehow survived better than the piano itself. Inside, he found old sheet music, the pages brittle and yellowed. Chopin, Beethoven, some pieces he didn't recognize with handwritten notes in the margins. "Look at this," Lisa called from the far side of the piano. She was pointing at something carved into the wood, barely visible under decades of dirt and damage. Daniel came closer, using his phone's flashlight. letters carved carefully into the side panel where they'd be hidden from view. CW 1887-1925. Initials? Tommy suggested. And dates, Daniel said. Birth and death, maybe? Or when they owned it. They documented everything. Took hundreds of photos, filled memory cards with footage. By the time the light started fading, they'd been in the house for 6 hours. Daniel knew they'd be back tomorrow and every day that week. But something kept drawing him back to the ballroom, to that ruined piano sitting in the fading light. On their way out, Daniel paused in the doorway one last time. In the dim evening light, the piano looked almost alive somehow, like it was waiting for something, waiting to tell its story. You okay? Lisa asked. Yeah, Daniel said. Just, don't you feel it? Like this place has secrets? Tommy laughed. It's an old house, man. They all feel like that. But Daniel wasn't so sure. That anonymous email, the timing of them getting access, the way that piano sat there like the centerpiece of everything, it all felt deliberate somehow. Like they were meant to find it. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about those initials, about what kind of person would carve their lifespan into a piano. He thought about the mansion, sealed for 40 years, and why. He thought about that last person who'd played that instrument, their fingers on keys that now sat warped and broken. At 2 a.m, he got up and started researching. Property records, old newspaper archives, historical society databases. The name connected to the house was Whitmore. Caroline Whitmore, specifically. Born 1862, died 1925. The same dates carved into the piano. She'd owned the mansion, lived there for decades. But that's where the trail went cold. There were gaps in the records, missing pieces. A few mentions in society pages from the early 1900s. Charity events, fundraisers, but nothing that explained why the house had been abandoned, why her piano bore those carved dates, why everything had been left exactly as it was. Daniel stared at the photos on his laptop screen, at that magnificent ruined piano sitting in the wreckage of that ballroom. Somewhere in that instrument, he was certain, was a story waiting to be discovered. He had no idea how right he was, or how much that discovery would change everything. Daniel posted the first video on Thursday. By Friday morning, it had 500,000 views. By Saturday, it crossed 2 million. The comments section exploded with people begging for more, asking about the piano, sharing theories about Caroline Whitmore and why the mansion had been abandoned. But one comment stood out. It came from someone named Restore and Revive, posted at 3 a.m. That Steinway can be saved. I need to see it in person. Contact me. The profile belonged to Elena Vasquez, a piano restorer based in Seattle. Her credentials were impressive. 40 years of experience, work with museums and collectors, a reputation for bringing impossible cases back to life. Daniel called her that same morning. I saw your video, she said, her voice direct and no nonsense. That instrument is in bad shape, but I've seen worse. The question is what's inside it? Inside? Daniel asked. Wood expands and contracts over time. Water gets in, things shift. Sometimes the internal structure tells you more than the outside ever could. I need to examine it properly. 3 days later, Elena arrived at the mansion with 2 assistants and enough equipment to fill a van. She was in her mid-60s, hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing coveralls that had seen decades of hard work. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Daniel and Tommy followed her into the ballroom with cameras rolling. Elena circled the piano slowly, not touching it yet, just looking. She knelt down, peered underneath, stood on a step stool to examine the top. Her assistants took measurements, made notes, photographed everything from every angle. Well, Daniel finally asked. It's a mess, Elena said bluntly, but it's a Steinway Model D from 1887. Maybe 24 of these still exist in this condition. The soundboard is cracked, strings are rusted through, the action is probably completely destroyed inside. The wood is warped from water damage, and that fallen ceiling beam did a number on the structure. So it's a loss? Elena shot him a look. I didn't say that. I said it's a mess. There's a difference. She approached the piano, running her hands along its surface with surprising gentleness. Then she did something that made everyone in the room go quiet. She tried to lift the lid, it didn't budge. Swollen shut, one of her assistants said. Maybe, Elena murmured. She tried again, this time from a different angle. Still nothing. She walked around to the keyboard, brushed away debris, and pressed a key. Nothing happened. No sound, no movement. The key was completely stuck. "They're all seized," she said, trying another, then another. But when she reached the middle of the keyboard, something different happened. One key pressed down, just slightly, with a faint click. Elena froze. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Tommy asked. She pressed the key again. Click. Then she tried the one next to it. Nothing. The one on the other side. Nothing. She worked her way across the keyboard methodically, pressing each key. Out of 88 keys, only 7 made that clicking sound. "That's not normal," one of her assistants said. "No," Elena agreed. "It's not." She pulled out her phone, made a note of which keys clicked. Daniel noticed they seemed random, no pattern he could see. Elena was staring at them, her expression intense. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked. "I'm thinking this piano is more interesting than it looks." She turned to her assistants. "We need to open it up, carefully." The next hour was tense. Elena and her team worked slowly, removing panels, loosening screws that hadn't been touched in decades. The wood fought them, swollen and stubborn. At one point they had to stop and let certain pieces dry out before they could continue. Daniel filmed everything, though he wasn't sure what he was filming. Elena was focused, barely speaking except to give quiet instructions to her assistants. The Historical Society representative who'd been checking in daily chose that afternoon to visit, and even she stood silent, watching. Finally, Elena removed a large panel from the piano's side. She shone a flashlight into the gap, then went completely still. "What is it?" Daniel moved closer. "There's something in here." Her voice was different now. Careful. Something that shouldn't be. She reached in, slowly, then stopped. "I need smaller tools, and gloves. Nobody touch anything." The wait felt like forever. Elena's assistant ran to the van and came back with a box of delicate instruments, the kind surgeons might use. Elena pulled on latex gloves, selected a long, thin tool, and reached back into the piano's interior. When her hand emerged, she was holding something wrapped in what looked like oiled cloth. Old, darkened with age, but intact. She set it on a clean tarp her assistant had spread on the floor. "There's more," she said, reaching back in. "A lot more." One by one, she pulled out bundles. Some were wrapped in oiled cloth, others in what might have been silk once. They varied in size, some small enough to fit in a hand, others as big as books. Elena laid them out carefully, not opening anything yet, just extracting them from their hiding place. "How did these survive?" Daniel whispered. "The oiled cloth," Elena said, still working. "Someone knew what they were doing. This type of wrapping was used to protect documents, keep moisture out. And inside the piano sealed up. It created almost an airtight space." By the time she finished, 17 bundles lay on the tarp. The piano's interior panel revealed a hollow space, clearly built intentionally, accessible only from that specific side and only after removing panels in a particular order. "This was designed," Elena said quietly. "This compartment was part of the original construction. You don't accidentally create a space like this." Her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for the largest bundle. She looked at Daniel. "You're recording?" "Every second." "Good. Because I think we're about to find out why this piano was so important." She carefully unwrapped the oiled cloth. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover worn but intact. The leather had survived remarkably well, though you could see age in every crease. Embossed on the cover in gold that had faded to a dull yellow were the initials C.W. Elena opened it to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, written in ink that had turned brown with age. But it was perfectly legible. "This journal belongs to Caroline Whitmore," Elena read aloud. "I begin this record in the year 1885, with the fervent hope that should these pages be discovered, they will serve as testament to the work we did, the lives we saved, and the truth, that justice does not end simply because the law declares it so." The room went silent. Even the sound of the camera seemed loud. Elena turned the page, her eyes scanning quickly. Then she looked up, her face pale. "You need to call someone," she said. "The Historical Society, a university, someone who knows about." She paused, looking back at the journal. "Someone who knows about resistance movements. Because unless I'm reading this wrong, Caroline Whitmore was running some kind of underground operation right here, from this house, and this piano was part of it." Daniel's mind was racing. What kind of operation? Elena carefully turned another page, then another, her eyes widening with each line she read. The kind that saved lives, the kind that broke laws to do what was right. She looked up at the collapsed ceiling, the ruined ballroom, the piano that had kept its secrets for a century, the kind people get killed for. She carefully closed the journal, her hands reverent now. "We need experts here, now, because this isn't just a piano anymore. This is evidence of something that changed history, and we've only opened one journal. There are 16 more bundles here." Daniel looked at the pile of wrapped packages, then at the piano, then at the journal with its faded initials. Somewhere in this house, Caroline Whitmore had hidden her story. And now, 100 years later, it was finally coming to light. Whatever secrets that piano held, they were about to shake everything people thought they knew about this quiet corner of Portland, and maybe about history itself. The call went out that same evening. By morning, the mansion was swarming with people. Historians from 3 different universities, representatives from the National Archives, preservation specialists, and a team from the Smithsonian. They'd set up a makeshift lab in the dining room, complete with examination tables, photography equipment, and climate-controlled storage boxes. Dr. James Wu arrived from Stanford on a red-eye flight. He was a specialist in immigration history and resistance movements of the early 20th century. Daniel had watched him on documentaries before, the guy who could take a single document and unravel entire hidden chapters of history. "Show me everything," he said the moment he walked in, not bothering with introductions. They'd only opened 3 of the 17 bundles so far. The team had agreed to wait for proper expertise before going further. Elena led him to the dining room where the journals and documents were laid out under protective covering. Dr. Wu pulled on gloves, adjusted his glasses, and picked up Caroline's first journal. He read in silence for 10 minutes. Then 20. Nobody interrupted. You could see his expression changing as he turned each page. Surprise, then disbelief, then something like awe. Finally, he set the journal down carefully. "Do you understand what this is?" "She was helping people," Daniel said. "Some kind of underground operation." "Not just people," Dr. Wu said. "She was running a resistance network that we didn't know existed. Look at these dates. 1885 to 1925. 40 years. The Civil War ended in 1865. By 1885, most people thought the Underground Railroad was history. But Caroline didn't stop. She evolved it." He opened the journal again, pointing to a passage. "She's talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act here. 1882, the government banned Chinese laborers from entering the country. Thousands of people already here faced deportation. Caroline was helping them escape north into Canada." One of the other historians, Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, moved closer. "But it's not just Chinese immigrants. Look at this entry from 1894. She pointed to another passage. Labor organizers, people who'd spoken out against factory conditions, mine owners, railroad companies. Some were being threatened, others faced charges that would have meant prison or worse. And here, another researcher added, carefully turning pages, women. She helped women leave dangerous situations, abusive husbands who had legal control over them. Some of these entries mention women who were forced into marriages or whose families wouldn't let them leave." Dr. Wu was moving through the second journal now, his eyes scanning rapidly. "She had a network, safe houses across Portland and into Washington, code names for everyone involved, meeting locations that changed monthly, and this." He paused, pointing to a detailed sketch. "This is a map, routes through the city, timing for train schedules, notes about which border crossings had sympathetic guards. The room buzzed with activity as more bundles were carefully opened. More journals, each one meticulously dated. Letters bound in ribbon, some in English, others in Chinese, a few in languages the team would need translators to identify. And photographs, nearly 200 of them, surprisingly well preserved. The photographs were stunning. Grainy black and white images showing people in period clothing. Some were group shots taken outside buildings Daniel didn't recognize. Others showed individuals, their faces serious, staring at the camera with expressions that carried weight. Each photo had notes on the back in Caroline's handwriting, names, dates, and in some cases, a single word. Safe. This is revolutionary, Dr. Wu breathed. We have gaps in the historical record for this entire period. We knew resistance happened, but we didn't know how, or who was involved, or how many people were helped. Caroline documented everything. Daniel was filming as the team worked, capturing their reactions, their discoveries. Elena stood to one side, watching quietly. She caught his eye and nodded toward the ballroom. He followed her out. You realize what you found, right? She said quietly. A piece of history? More than that. You found proof that when the government fails people, ordinary citizens step up. Caroline wasn't rich or powerful. She was just someone who saw injustice and decided to do something about it. Back in the dining room, Dr. Okonkwo was examining the photographs more closely. Look at this, she called out. The same buildings appear in multiple photos across different years. These must be the safe houses. She laid several photographs side by side. A small church. A boarding house. A restaurant with Chinese characters on the sign. A private home with a distinctive porch. Each one appeared in photos spanning years, sometimes decades. Can we identify these locations? Daniel asked. Some of them might still exist, Dr. Wu said. Portland's changed a lot, but some buildings from that era survived. If we can match these photos to actual addresses... He trailed off, the implications hanging in the air. One of the younger researchers, Kevin, had been going through the letters. Dr. Wu, you need to see this. His voice was shaky. The letter was written in English, dated 1923. The handwriting was different from Caroline's, rougher, less practiced. Dr. Wu read it aloud. Dear Mrs. Whitmore, I am writing to tell you I made it safe to Vancouver. The crossing was exactly as you described. The man at the border looked at my papers and waved me through. I cannot express my gratitude for what you have done. My children will grow up free because of you. I know you said never to contact you after crossing, but I needed you to know. You saved my life. Yours in eternal gratitude, Chen Wei. The room went quiet. This wasn't just historical documentation. These were real people, real lives changed by one woman's decision to risk everything. There are dozens more like this, Kevin said. People writing years later to thank her. Some from Canada, some from as far as California. They all say the same thing, she saved them. Dr. Wu sat down heavily. We need to verify all of this. Track down records, cross-reference names with immigration documents, deportation lists. If even half of what's in these journals is accurate, Caroline Whitmore personally helped hundreds of people escape persecution. Why didn't anyone know? Daniel asked. Why hide all of this in a piano? Because what she was doing was illegal, Dr. Okonkwo said quietly. Harboring fugitives, forging documents, helping people evade federal law. If she'd been caught, she would have gone to prison. Everyone in her network would have been arrested. The people she helped would have been deported or worse. Elena spoke up from the doorway. The piano was brilliant, actually. Think about it. It's a massive piece of furniture that nobody moves. It's expensive, so people assume it's valuable and don't mess with it. And if you're wealthy enough to own a Steinway, you're probably above suspicion. Who would think to look inside it? And the keys, Daniel said, remembering. The 7 that clicked. That was a lock. More like a puzzle, Elena confirmed. You'd need to know which keys to press in which order to release the mechanism that allowed the panel to come off. Caroline could access it whenever she needed, but anyone else would just see a broken piano. Dr. Wu was back at the journals, reading more carefully now. She mentions the music here. Certain pieces played at certain times meant different things. A Chopin nocturne meant the route was clear. Beethoven meant danger. She literally coded messages into music. But why stop in 1925? One of the researchers asked. That's when she died, right? What happened? Dr. Wu flipped to the last journal, carefully turning to the final entries. The handwriting was shakier here, less steady. She was sick. She knew she was dying. These last entries, he paused reading. She's writing about shutting down the network, making sure everyone who needed to get out got out, destroying evidence. But she kept the journals. She hid them where she knew they'd be safe, where someday someone might find them and tell the story. Daniel looked around the room at all these experts, at the documents spread across tables, at the photographs of people whose names were being spoken aloud for the first time in a century. Through the doorway he could see into the ballroom where the old piano sat, its secret finally revealed. She wanted us to find this, Daniel said quietly. That's why she put the dates on the piano. She was leaving a clue. A clue that took 100 years to solve, Dr. Okonkwo agreed. But now we know, and now we need to figure out who these people were, what happened to them, and what happened to Caroline's network after she died. Dr. Wu closed the journal carefully. This changes everything we thought we knew about resistance movements in early 20th century America. This is going to rewrite textbooks. But as Daniel would discover in the coming days, rewriting history meant confronting uncomfortable truths, and not everyone in Portland was going to be happy about what Caroline Whitmore's piano had revealed. The story broke nationally on a Wednesday morning. Daniel's video documenting the discovery hit 10 million views in the first 6 hours. Major news outlets picked it up by afternoon. By evening, Caroline Whitmore's name was trending worldwide. But it was a phone call on Thursday that changed everything. Daniel was at the mansion, filming Dr. Wu's team as they continued cataloging documents when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Is this Daniel Rivera? The voice was elderly, female, shaking slightly. Yes, this is Daniel. My name is Dorothy Chen. I'm 89 years old and I live in Vancouver. I saw your video about Caroline Whitmore and the piano. She paused and Daniel could hear her breathing, gathering courage. I think she saved my grandfather's life. Daniel stepped outside, his heart pounding. Can you tell me more? My grandfather's name was Chen Wei. He came to America in 1910 to work on the railroads. By 1923, the government was deporting Chinese workers. My grandfather was terrified. He had a wife and 2 children. My mother was just a baby. Then someone told him about a woman who could help. A woman with a grand piano. Daniel pulled up the research files on his phone, scrolling through the scanned letters. There it was, the letter signed Chen Wei, dated 1923. Mrs. Chen, we found a letter. From your grandfather to Caroline. He wrote to thank her after he made it to Vancouver. The silence on the other end lasted so long Daniel thought the connection had dropped. Then he heard soft crying. I knew the stories were real, Dorothy whispered. My whole life my mother told me about the piano angel who saved our family. But we never knew her name. We didn't know anything except that she existed. And now you found her. Within 2 days, Dr. Wu's team was flooded with similar calls and emails. A woman in Seattle whose great-grandmother had escaped an abusive marriage in 1903. A man in San Francisco whose great-great-uncle, a labor organizer, had fled Portland after being threatened by factory owners. A family in Toronto who'd kept letters written by their ancestor about a musical route to freedom. The research team created a database, cross-referencing Caroline's journals with the contacts coming in. They verified over 60 individual cases, real people, real families, all connected to Caroline's network. But not everyone was celebrating. Daniel started getting different kinds of messages. Angry ones. People demanding he take down his videos. Some claimed he was making up stories for views. Others said he was attacking Portland's history, trying to make the city look bad. Then the threatening emails started. You need to see this, Tommy said one morning, his face pale. He showed Daniel a message that had come through the channel. It was detailed and specific, listing Daniel's home address, his family members' names, even his car's license plate. The message ended with a simple warning. Leave the past alone. Daniel forwarded it to the police, but he was shaken. He wasn't the only one. Dr. Wu received similar threats. So did Dr. Okonkwo. Someone spray-painted liar across the Historical Society's front door. The real shock came when Dr. Wu's team identified some of the people Caroline had written about in her journals. Not the people she'd helped, the people who'd tried to stop her. This is going to be sensitive, Dr. Wu said, gathering Daniel and the core research team in the mansion's library. Some of the names Caroline mentioned, they're recognizable. important families in Portland, people whose descendants still live here. He pulled up documents on his laptop. Caroline wrote about informants, people who reported suspected safe houses to authorities, business owners who fired workers they suspected of helping refugees, even a city official who took bribes to look the other way while Caroline's network operated, but who also tipped off federal agents when it suited him. Can we verify this? Daniel asked. We've been cross-referencing with historical records, newspaper archives, immigration documents. It checks out. These people existed. They did what Caroline said they did, and some of their families are still prominent in the city. The implications hung heavy in the room. Dr. Okonkwo spoke carefully. If we publish this information, we're not just telling Caroline's story. We're exposing the people who worked against her. Their descendants will have to confront the fact that their ancestors actively tried to get innocent people deported or arrested. But that's the truth, Kevin said. History isn't clean. If we only tell the comfortable parts, we're not doing history. We're doing propaganda. I agree, Dr. Wu said. But we need to be prepared for backlash. This city has built statues to some of these families, named streets after them. They're seen as founders, pillars of the community. Now we're saying they were on the wrong side of justice. The backlash came faster than anyone expected. A prominent Portland family, the Ashfords, held a press conference. Their ancestor, Robert Ashford, was mentioned multiple times in Caroline's journals as someone who reported suspected safe houses to authorities. The family claimed the journals were fabricated, that Daniel and the research team were trying to destroy their reputation for publicity. Our great-great-grandfather was a respected businessman and civic leader, the family's lawyer said on camera. These accusations are baseless and defamatory. We're exploring legal action. Other families joined in. Within a week, 3 separate lawsuits had been filed, demanding the journals be sealed until their authenticity could be properly verified. Never mind that multiple experts had already authenticated them. The families wanted them hidden. The controversy split the city. Some people rallied behind Caroline's story, organizing vigils at the mansion demanding the truth be told completely. Others defended the accused families, arguing that people should be judged by the standards of their time, not modern values. Daniel found himself at the center of it all. News crews camped outside his apartment. He did interview after interview, always saying the same thing. We're just sharing what we found. History is complicated. Sometimes our heroes aren't who we thought they were. Sometimes the heroes we never knew about are the most important ones. But it was Dorothy Chen's testimony that shifted public opinion. Dr. Wu arranged for her to speak at a press conference. She was frail, needing a walker, but her voice was strong. She brought the letter her grandfather had written to Caroline, carefully preserved in a protective sleeve. My grandfather died when I was 12, Dorothy said, cameras flashing. But before he died, he told me stories about being terrified in 1923, about men who wanted him deported just because of where he was born, about a woman who risked everything to help him escape with his family. He never knew her name, but he said she played piano. Beautiful music that meant safety. She held up the letter with shaking hands. This is his handwriting. These are his words thanking the woman who saved him. If she hadn't helped, I wouldn't exist. My children wouldn't exist. My grandchildren wouldn't exist. Caroline Whitmore gave us life. Dorothy looked directly at the cameras. I know some families are upset. I know some people don't want this history told. But my family matters too. The hundreds of families Caroline saved matter too. We have a right to know our history. We have a right to honor the woman who made our existence possible. The room erupted in applause. That evening, more descendants came forward. A middle-aged man whose great-aunt had escaped a violent marriage in 1908. A professor whose grandfather, a labor organizer, had fled Portland in 1919 after factory owners put a price on his head. A woman whose family had been helped by Caroline in 1915, escaping across the border when anti-immigrant violence threatened their children. Each one had stories passed down through generations. Each one had fragments of proof, letters, photographs, family records that matched Caroline's journals. The evidence was overwhelming. The lawsuits quietly disappeared. The Ashford family and others stopped appearing on camera. They couldn't argue against dozens of families whose very existence testified to Caroline's courage and their ancestors' opposition to it. But the damage to the community was real. Old friendships fractured. People took sides. Some churches split over the controversy. The comfortable narrative Portland had told itself about its founding families had been shattered, and not everyone was ready to accept the more complicated truth. Dr. Wu stood in the ballroom one evening, looking at the piano that had started it all. Daniel was there too, camera off for once. History should make us uncomfortable sometimes, Dr. Wu said quietly. If it doesn't, we're probably not telling the whole story. Caroline knew that. That's why she hid these journals where they'd eventually be found. She knew the truth would be difficult, but she also knew it needed to be told. Daniel looked at the carved initials on the piano, at the dates that marked Caroline's life. Do you think she'd be surprised? That it took 100 years? Maybe. But I think she'd be proud that when the truth finally came out, people like Dorothy and the others were ready to stand up for it. That's what Caroline did her whole life, stood up for truth even when it was dangerous, even when it was uncomfortable. Through the window, Daniel could see a small crowd gathered outside the mansion gates. Not protesters anymore. These were people holding candles, some with photographs of ancestors Caroline had helped. A quiet vigil for a woman most of them had never heard of until 2 weeks ago. The piano had kept its secret for a century. Now that secret was changing lives again, just in a different way. And the story wasn't over yet. 8 months after the discovery, Elena stood in her workshop putting the final touches on the Steinway. It had taken her team nearly 600 hours of painstaking work. Every warped panel had been carefully restored. Every string replaced, the soundboard rebuilt, the action completely reconstructed. But she'd insisted on one thing. The hidden compartment stayed exactly as it was, functional and accessible. It's part of the piano story now, she'd told the restoration committee. We can't erase that. The workshop door opened. Daniel walked in with his camera, followed by Dr. Wu and Dorothy Chen, who'd become something of a fixture in the restoration process, visiting whenever her health allowed. Is it ready? Dorothy asked, her eyes bright. Elena smiled. Want to hear it? She sat at the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys for a moment. Then she began to play. The sound that filled the workshop was rich and clear, each note resonating perfectly. It was hard to believe this was the same broken instrument they'd found under debris and water damage. Elena played a Chopin nocturne, the same piece Caroline had used as a signal that the route was safe. Dorothy closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. My grandfather heard this, she whispered. This exact music 100 years ago, and it meant hope. The piano had found a home. The Whitmore mansion had been purchased by a coalition of historical societies, descendants of people Caroline had helped, and community donors. After months of restoration, it was about to open as the Caroline Whitmore Museum of Resistance and Compassion. The name had sparked its own debate. Some people thought resistance sounded too political, but Dr. Okonkwo had been firm. Caroline resisted injustice. That's not political, that's moral. If calling it what it was makes people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not history's. Daniel walked through the mansion the day before the grand opening, filming one last time. The ballroom had been beautifully restored, its windows repaired, the collapsed ceiling rebuilt. The piano sat in the center under soft lighting, positioned exactly where they'd found it. But now visitors could see inside the hidden compartment through a clear protective panel. They could press the 7 special keys in sequence and watch the mechanism work. Around the ballroom's walls, they'd mounted the photographs Caroline had taken. Each one had a caption with the person's name, their story, and what happened to them after Caroline helped them escape. Not all the stories had happy endings. Some people had still faced hardship, discrimination, even death. But they'd had a chance. That's what Caroline had given them. The journals themselves were in climate-controlled cases in another room, open to pages that told particularly powerful stories. Visitors could read Caroline's own words, see her handwriting, understand her motivations. One entry, dated April 1887, was displayed prominently. They say the law is the law and we must respect it. But when the law is unjust, when it tears families apart and punishes people for the crime of existing, then the law itself becomes criminal. I cannot stand by. I will not stand by. If this piano can help even one person find safety, then let my hands never leave its keys. The museum didn't shy away from the controversy. An entire section was dedicated to the opposition, the people and families who'd worked against Caroline. The displays were factual, not accusatory, showing newspaper clippings, official documents, and excerpts from Caroline's journals. Visitors could draw their own conclusions, but the most powerful section was called The Legacy Lives. It featured family trees of the people Caroline had helped, showing how those single acts of rescue had rippled through generations. Dorothy's family tree was there, her grandfather Chen Wei at the top, then branches showing his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. 43 people alive today because Caroline had helped one man cross a border in 1923. Multiply that across all the families they'd identified, and the number was staggering. Over 2,000 living people could trace their existence directly to Caroline's intervention. Doctors, teachers, artists, engineers, parents, grandparents, all living because one woman had decided that justice mattered more than law. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday in November 2026. The weather was perfect, crisp autumn air, blue skies. Crowds started gathering hours before the doors opened. News crews from around the world set up outside. This wasn't just a local story anymore. This was about hidden history coming to light, about uncomfortable truths being faced, about honoring heroism that had gone unrecognized for a century. Daniel stood near the entrance, camera ready, watching people arrive. He recognized some faces, descendants of people Caroline had helped, scholars who'd been studying the documents, community members who'd followed the story from the beginning. But there were also strangers, people who'd traveled from across the country just to be here for this moment. Dorothy arrived in a wheelchair now, her health having declined over the past months, but her smile was radiant. With her were 23 members of her extended family, spanning 4 generations. They wore matching pins with Caroline's initials. She would have loved this, Dorothy said, looking at the restored mansion, knowing her story was finally told. The ceremony began at noon. The museum director spoke, then Dr. Wu, then Dr. Okonkwo. They talked about history, about resistance, about how ordinary people could do extraordinary things. But it was Dorothy's speech that left everyone in tears. She spoke slowly, her voice amplified by microphones, but strong with conviction. Caroline Whitmore broke laws. She lied to authorities. She risked her freedom and her life. And she was absolutely right to do it. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. We teach our children to follow rules, to respect authority. But we also need to teach them that some rules are wrong. That sometimes the most moral thing you can do is break an immoral law. Caroline knew this. She didn't do it for glory or recognition. She did it because she couldn't live with herself if she didn't. Dorothy paused, looking out at the crowd. I'm 89 years old. I don't have much time left. But I'm here today because of her. My children are here because of her. My grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, all here because one woman decided that doing right was more important than staying safe. She gestured to the other descendants in the crowd. Look around, see all these people? We are Caroline's legacy. Every breath we take is thanks to her courage. The best way we can honor her is to live by her example. When we see injustice, we act. When we see cruelty, we intervene. When laws are wrong, we have the courage to resist them. The applause started slowly, then grew until it was thunderous. People were crying, hugging, holding each other. The descendants of Caroline's network stood together, a living testament to what one person's courage could create. The moment came to unveil the piano. Elena wheeled it out to the front steps where everyone could see. It gleamed in the sunlight, completely restored, beautiful and dignified. But everyone knew its real beauty was in what it had hidden, what it had protected, what it represented. A young pianist named Jennifer Kim stepped forward. She was 17, a descendant of one of the families Caroline had helped in 1919. She'd practiced for months for this moment. She sat at the bench, positioned her hands over the keys, and began to play. The music that flowed out was a medley, the Chopin nocturne Caroline had used as a signal, mixed with traditional Chinese melodies, labor songs from the early 1900s, and modern compositions. Old and new, woven together, just like the story the piano told. The crowd listened in complete silence. Even the news crew stopped moving, cameras still rolling, but operators transfixed by the music pouring out of this instrument that had been silent for 40 years. When the last note faded, no one moved for several seconds. Then Dorothy began to clap. Others joined her. The applause grew and grew until it seemed like the whole city was celebrating. Not just a piano, not just a building, but a truth that had waited a century to be heard. Daniel captured it all on camera, knowing this footage would be the final chapter of the story he'd started with that anonymous email 9 months ago. He thought about that first day, walking into the abandoned mansion, seeing the piano covered in debris. He'd had no idea what he was about to uncover. As the crowd filed into the museum, eager to see the exhibits, Daniel stayed outside for a moment. He looked up at the mansion, imagining Caroline at a window, watching, wondering if somehow, somewhere, she knew her story had finally been told. A small plaque had been mounted near the entrance. Daniel had helped write the inscription, Caroline Whitmore, 1862-1925. She broke unjust laws to save lives. She hid the truth to protect the vulnerable. She risked everything because justice mattered more than safety. May her courage inspire us to resist injustice wherever we find it. Inside, the piano began playing again as visitors explored. The sound drifted through the rooms, through the windows, out into the Portland afternoon. Music that had once signaled safety to desperate people now invited everyone to learn, to understand, to remember that heroes don't always get recognized in their own time. Sometimes they have to wait 100 years. Sometimes they have to hide their truth in a piano. But eventually, if they documented their courage and trusted that someone would find it, their story would be told. And that story would change everything. Daniel put his camera away and walked inside. The museum was full of people of all ages, all backgrounds, all drawn by the same thing, the power of one person's choice to do what was right even when it was dangerous, even when it was illegal. Even when no one would ever know, Caroline Whitmore had known, and she'd made sure that someday everyone else would know too. The piano played on, no longer hiding secrets, but sharing them. And in that music was a message that would echo far beyond these walls, far beyond this day. When you see injustice, act. When you can help, do. When history tries to forget the heroes who broke rules to save lives, make sure their names are remembered. One piano, one woman, 100 years, and a legacy that would never be forgotten again.